think that this is a question that we have dealt with quite often, particularly in working with parents. And let's put this in perspective then. Can we use the lens of a rights-based approach to children and adolescents' sexuality? This is not to suggest that in a given instance or in a given child, if notions, experiences, and tendencies towards sexuality have not developed, that one actively encourages it. But the idea is when it manifests, how do you structure it in a manner that goes back to the point that was made about issues of safety, of privacy, of boundaries, of health, and so on. When a child, a usual child, an average child, for example, comes out perhaps without clothes, and the tendency of caregivers to, either shame the child, and these are problematic because it then structures the notion of shame in a manner that is very different to what we call as the idea of body and sexual etiquette, which is embedded more in the issues of privacy, of boundaries, of health, and of safety. This is a framework that we need to keep in mind. If we take a deep dive into this framework, therefore, to explain what happens when a child actually manifests behaviors or tendencies of sexuality, Sheila?
So, if you look at young children, preschoolers particularly, and children without disability, they often touch their private parts and touch themselves. And it is certainly not contrary to common perception because they experience sexual pleasure. Pleasure they do, but that is sensory pleasure. The same kind of sensory pleasure that we all derive from looking at a beautiful painting, listening to some wonderful music, or you think of sensations like your grandmother braiding your hair or stroking your back, so sensory pleasures of that nature. Now, of course, over time, preschoolers are socialized to behave differently. They are told repeatedly not to touch themselves, etc. But the point still is, friends, that young children, and particularly children with disability who have social and cognitive difficulties, also have a higher need for sensory stimulation. They have high sensory needs, and that is why they tend to touch themselves, touch their private parts in order to stimulate themselves for sensory pleasure. So one of the things to do by way of diversion, distraction, is a lot of stimulation, particularly with children with disabilities. So it's not about punishment, it's not about yelling at children to say stop it because they may not always understand. But in addition to personal safety activities, to really look at a lot of hand activities, clay, finger painting, beading, and a whole range, listening to music, doing stuff. One of the things is that, children with disability are often left untended, or many such children are left untended, and because they lack stimulation, they tend to engage in, this sort of sexual play. So, early stimulation activities, play activities to divert, to distract, to keep their hands and minds occupied would be one way to stem the so-called unwanted or undesirable sexual play and behavior.